Yeah. Yeah, I'll fix it. Who's OG again?
Can you put this here?
Can you put this here?
Yeah.
Hi, can you please? Okay. Thanks, Albert.
Hello?
Our face is here. No, 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 no.
I'm close friend with his girlfriend.
All right, Prime Minister, here.
Test. Oh, wait, no. Inequalities exist in status quo of the provision of rights, and giving rights to individuals does not necessarily reduce them. That's why we need to focus on things that can make the lives of individuals that are willing to forego these rights better. Economic empowerment and streamlined policies that can be effectively implemented without opposition and dissent can only come out of homogeneous states. Therefore, we think from OG we should allow the sale of rights, and in terms of policy or how much money we're going to give them, we think that we're not going to put like a specific number or quantify it. I think this, for the purposes of debate, all sides should acknowledge that the amount will be sufficient or significant enough for these individuals to want to sell them, to entice them to sell. And this debate should occur in the best case where this money is enough. Therefore, this debate is about whether or not rights are a commodifiable variable that can be sold by individuals versus the side that says that it is not a commodifiable variable. Rights should exist deontologically regardless of its utilitarian outcomes. I'm going to talk about like 4 things in my speech. Firstly, I'm going to talk about how rights are a construct that is owned by the individual and therefore can be commodified by the individual. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how in the realistic scenario that a lot of people will trade off this rights and most of these individuals are economically disempowered, why this is more preferable. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about the benefits in terms of changes to the poor, in terms of their upliftment, and secondly about more effective policy making through more homogeneous states. And lastly, fourthly, I'm going to talk about how the state is unlikely to abuse their power when they have most of these rights from the economically disempowered. Firstly, how are rights a construct owned by the individual? Therefore, it's okay to commodify your rights. 3 sub-points under this. Firstly, you give up your rights in multiple scenarios already in status quo in exchange for economic benefit. So for example, you give up rights to ownership of certain property in exchange for money. You give up rights to like your time spent in your life, for example, by involving yourself in labor, by giving up your rights to your boss, to have absolute autonomy to do whatever you want within your working hours in exchange for a salary. So in numerous instances, individuals already give up their rights to commodify or for commodified benefit. We say that this principle should also extend to more important rights, right? Because if the individual believes that their rights or their fundamental rights is less valuable than economic gain, we should allow that. And we don't think that the counter argument to this, that individuals will only make this decision because they're economically desperate or they are in economic duress, is true. Because these are the individuals that are in the best place to decide if that economic duress is so damaging to them that they want some form of leeway or some form of escape from this duress. I think we should value the choices of these individuals. That's why the autonomy or attaching the autonomy in the hands of these individuals are more important. Next, no thank you. Human rights, or the absolute maintenance of human rights, are an imposition of a value system that is arbitrary. We say that if people are okay with trading off rights, we should allow them to do that, because in numerous like societies, a lot of people are okay with trading off their rights for utilitarian benefits. So for example, in countries like Singapore, a lot of people are very happy and content with their government. If you go to any Singaporean and you ask them if they're happy with the government, even if they can't dissent or even if their freedom of speech is like significantly reduced, they're still happy because the government derives legitimacy from their performance, from their ability to provide more utility to the lives of Singaporeans. Next, in terms of countries like Brunei, for example, like outside of Brunei, everyone thinks that Brunei is an oppressive state. But a lot of people in Brunei really enjoy the benefits that derive from the government. Like the government gives them a lot of transfer payments, social welfare, for example. These individuals benefit a lot from that. Now, next. And so therefore, rights are no thank you. Rights are a commodity that we should allow individuals to sell if they value economic empowerment a lot more. Next, realistically speaking, a lot of the economically disempowered individuals are the ones that will sell their vulnerable right, their fundamental rights. Why is this still preferable? Because of two reasons. The first reason is, in status quo, even if they have access to a lot of fundamental rights, these rights don't necessarily lead to a positive impact for a lot of the economically disempowered individuals. So I point to you examples such as poor, the minority who protest for more provisions from the government still doesn't care. It doesn't lead to like significant impacts because they can't exercise their rights properly or they don't have the structures to exercise their rights properly. Secondly, the exercise of freedom in and of itself leads to numerous harms, like conflict, for example, because the government can't satisfy everyone. When everyone exercises their freedom to get what they want, that's when conflict in terms of resource allocation happens. That because like when one group of people get more than the other will voice out and say why why is that other group getting more than my group. That's how conflict happens. Point to you examples such as in Malaysia when political divisiveness is extremely high. Like for example, you have like vernacular schools and individuals wanting to preserve the right of their own culture and their own language in exchange for the lack of uniformity in education has led to the ineffectiveness of education policies and has hamstrung our effectiveness of education policies throughout. Therefore, the exercise of freedom is not necessarily that beneficial, primarily because it leads to like greater things, like greater harms like political instability that harms our effectiveness of policy making. Closing.
Sherwin, just because I give away my rights to work means I can still take away my rights and quit. Can these people do the same on yours?
Sorry, can you please repeat that?
The rights that you wanted to argue on work, for example, means I can quit and immediately give up my rights. Can I do the same on yours?
Well, yeah, it's irreversible when you sell your fundamental rights to the government, but the point of that principal analysis is to prove to you why rights are a commodified variable as opposed to it being like a direct deductive logic, like a subsequent logical premise from the fact that individuals give up their rights for labor. Next, what are the benefits in terms of upliftment to the poor? So because when economically disempowered people sell their fundamental rights to the government, that's when they are more able to uplift themselves. And we tell you that the poor individuals are in the best place to decide if money is more valuable than their fundamental rights. Next, when individuals give up their rights, when a lot of them do so, that's when a government is more able to implement their policies because a society is more likely to become homogeneous, and that's when they are less likely to exercise their freedoms, right? So the impact through government policy making will reach individuals directly. That's when like things like vernacular schools and religion do not become a problem. Lastly, why is it not likely for government to abuse their power? Because the governments will not likely abuse their power that they derive from the sale of fundamental rights because the government wants to continue buying rights from the individuals. So therefore, abusing individuals will disincentivize other people from selling. Therefore, they are also interested in being moderate in terms of how they utilize the rights that they buy from these individuals. Very proud to propose.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for that speech. To continue, let's call upon Leader of Opposition.
Here.
Yeah.
The last time a government tried to restrict the rights and take all rights away from individual was the Soviet Russia. And we think that it's this side of the house, or in this debate, the side of government essentially does the same thing, but they frame it better by saying the state is going to buy it from you. We think under this side of the house, rights are something, even if we accept it is a construct, it's not something that belongs to the individual. In my speech, I will flesh out the principal argumentation, or specifically where rights come from and how rights are distributed, but specifically the harm twofold. Number one, the ability for an individual in society to decide that his or her right is less valuable than other people in society inherently devalues that right in itself. We don't think the individual is in a position to make that decision. But more importantly, we're going to talk about the protection for minorities, people specifically who have a vested interest in selling those rights, something we don't think the PM was necessarily able to protect. Before that, responses. The first argument is that they say, this is similar to everything in society. For instance, we give up our rights to time in order to work in return for money. The simple response towards this is that selling of your right to property, selling your property does not equate to the selling of your rights to own property. This means to say, if you own a house, if you own a car, you can sell that car, you can give up your right to that particular car, that particular property, you still retain the right to own property. And we think this right is particularly important because your right to own property means the state has to protect you from theft, means the state has to protect you from robbery. And specifically in societies where individuals do not have sufficient protection, they need to have rights, or they need to have a reason for the state to enforce the protection of the rights, of their property. That's why we don't think you can trade off these things like that. But then they say, the individual is the best person to decide. In the same line of argumentation concedes that people of income inequality, or people who suffer from relatively poor, for instance, are more incentivized to buy this. In my argument, I will show you why this is harmful, sufficient to point out this characterization is in tension. Thirdly, they say that people in Brunei and Singapore benefit a lot from the state, even though the perception is they don't have a lot from right. As a half Singaporean myself, I find that quite offensive. But anyways, we also think that within those areas, even if we accept that people have less rights in return for more economic equality, we don't think the harm is that everyone in general not having access to those rights. We think the harm is the individual being able to commodify a sovereign right, which in turn devalues all rights in general. Lastly, they say this illogical argument about having just because you have rights doesn't mean you're able to exercise it. This is an argument to fix institutions to allow you to exercise those rights, not to let you sell those rights. Lastly, the exercise of right leads to bad outcome. I don't think this is an argument by pure utility. You say that because some rights lead to bad outcome, we should then ban it. I think there are many other ways which states can limit the harm, at least by passing laws that in the status quo, for instance, ban a lot of things such as crime, murder, things which protect society in general. Two things in the speech. Number one, while rights cannot be valued on the free market, we would argue from the side of opening opposition that rights are not owned by the individual. Rights are owned by the state. Why? Because as individuals who live in a society, who live in a community that's dependent on one another, we have a central body that is in charge of protecting individuals within those society. This is the social contract theory, which argues that individuals give up their rights to the government in return for certain amounts of protection. But the individual giving up this, because everyone in society gives up the right to the government, we will argue that every single individual in society no longer owns those rights. The rights are given to the state, and the state gives them to individuals as they see fit. This is why states have the ability to ban certain things, ban things such as smoking or drinking alcohol, for instance. That's why we always have debates about the limit of the ability for states to intervene with individuals on the limits to which states can provide choices towards individuals. Why is this important? Because we think that states because states are the best arbiter and have to be the only arbiter in which rights can be given and which rights cannot be given. This means to say, if the state argues that the right to protection from torture is one that is important, we think this value is something that is lost at the point where certain individuals can sell their right to protection from torture because they don't think they will be tortured, or they are being tortured anyways and want to make some money out of it. Therefore, we will argue that states must be the only arbiter of which rights can and cannot be given towards the individual. We cannot allow the individual to make the rights themselves. I'll take it a bit. The the second part of this argument is that we think the ability to sell certain rights prevents the full exercise of those rights in general. Not just the fact that rights exist in a hierarchy, i.e. the right to life is at the top, the rights to choice, and then within that, the negative rights protection, all that stuff. We think selling off certain parts of that hierarchy of rights prevents you from exercising the full extent of those rights. But even if that were the case, we think that even if you were happy with the trade-off of this, we think that selling off certain rights prevents other people from accessing all those rights, because at the point when certain rights are devalued, at the point when certain rights are sold off, there's less incentive to protect the people who hold those rights to remain. We will argue that rights are equal in value and they cannot be commodified by principle. Yes.
Yes, fundamental rights are supposed to be uncompromising. How can state be arbiters of these things?
Because they're democratically elected and are given power by the people. But even if that weren't the case, that is the status quo in which we're debating in, right? So, second, in terms of tangible, why we think this policy and power structures of power and prevents change. We would argue the characterization that the Prime Minister gives is that the people who are most likely to be incentivized to sell these rights are people who are faced economic inequality. This means to say people who have a lack of access to money, people who are poor, people who are not protected, who don't feel protected by the state within the status quo. These individuals are more likely to sell their rights. We think the rationality is clouded for a few reasons. The first, they may really need money and they don't see alternatives to get money, or they see this as an easy way in order to get more money. We think this hurts these individuals because the decision that they make now, for instance, selling the right to life, for instance, or selling the right to own property, comes back to hurt them in the future at the point where they are unable to protect or exercise this right, at the point where they are severely harmed by these things. We also think that for poorer people and for minorities in general, there's a perverse incentive for these individuals to sell their rights, especially in a society that is not very protective of minority rights. The problem with these individuals is that each individual does not feel they're able to change the system. Therefore, they think from an individual perspective, it is better for me to sell this right, like if OG says there's a large amount of money, rather than try to stay to change the system. The direct outcome of this is that there's far less people able to change those systems, because there's far less people able and willing to fight to enforce those change in government. The direct outcome of this as well is the reduction or the undermining of democratic institutions such as courts that were created to protect those rights to start with. We think this enforces or entrenches power structures. We think this makes it far difficult for us to make a better democracy, and for those reasons we oppose.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. To continue, Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Oh.
So the main contention from opposition is that it's extremely difficult for you to change a system if you forgo your rights. It is already difficult to change a system when the conflict of fundamental liberties between the majority, the minorities, and the interest of the state is already so entrenched and enshrined. The rights that we are deeming to protect only holds principal value to the extent where it has been done for the longest of time, as opposed to what is the direct benefit people can achieve if they forgo this ability. So before going into my arguments, I just have two responses to the side of opening opposition. They tell you that state must be the arbiter of rights, which is exactly what we are saying. We get to decide when and where to exercise these opportunities for that individual. You are supposed to argue that fundamental liberties are uncompromising and every individual has the capacity to exercise it whenever and wherever. Whether or not it's effective is a different story, right? So to bring impacts like the state has a right to protect if someone takes away your right. If that is true, then in Malaysia, LGBT communities are supposed to be the bastions of success. But it is not true, because state gets to decide how they interpret these rights to movement, how they interpret your rights to religion, how they interpret your rights to life in and of itself. So the value of these things is inherently dumb, minute, and stupid. So with you saying that you must protect all of these things, must give me a link as to why that is likely. In the absence of that, That is why OG is framed as to why it's the most important thing to care about these individuals. Because if you notice, a lot of the response is people will sell their rights because they are in pain so much. Exactly. If people are in pain, what's wrong to allow them to sell things that will not give them pain? I think that's perfectly fine to do if you cannot prove that the benefits of these rights bring any value. Therefore, done with opening opposition, going into arguments. The first thing, we have to dislodge this premise that just because the Soviet Union tried to take people's rights, this is the exactly same case that OG is doing. No, people are angry when you try to take anything without giving them a fee. That's why people are angry with theft, not angry if you sell something. Right? I don't see why this is the same thing. So, if you give significant price, I think people will be less angry because they are justified in you selling them. People are angry because they don't gain anything from you taking their rights and a belief in the structure that maybe something can change, maybe it doesn't. But I don't lose anything if I give it away. That's why people will fight. That's why I think it's more likely. Secondly, on the idea that state has to protect these rights, this is what I agree with. And the biggest problem in society is when everybody thinks state has to protect their rights. Because if you realize the biggest conflict in our society is individuals believing that their rights and their rights alone is the most important aspect of society. This is why conflicts in religion, conflicts in religion, conflicts in sexuality, and conflicts exist. Because each and every one of us believe, no, state must protect my right not to be offended by people having gay sex. No, state must protect my right so that I can have gay sex. What is state going to do? Whatever state chooses, one person will be at loss. This person deserves the opportunity that if I'm going to lose anyway, might as well I make some money out of it. This is why it's extremely important to recognize the argumentation from Sharwin. Before I go to my next argument, sure.
So if it's true that it's the poor who sells their rights, does it not mean that the rich now decides they put the policy and the direction of all the states?
Oh, the rich don't decide policy now? Come on, man! The power of control is already in the hands of the individuals that are the most privileged. I don't see how things will change. Exactly why all of our argumentation is about those who are the most economically disparaged. Nothing will change in your side if you say that these rights will be protected. I don't think there's a Mahatma Gandhi right now, right? So, going into why do people value these things? Because another contention that will come along the line of opposition bench is that people derive happiness from the ability to exercise religion, from your ability to exercise movement, or the fact that you are not in control. The only reasons we value these things is because we believe that there will be a direct outcome from you achieving these things. So, for example, if you are a Muslim person in Malaysia, you think that religion is extremely important because I get to extend my happiness by practicing this religion. But for a large chunk and the majority of individuals, if you subscribe to any religion other than that is dominant, if you subscribe to any sexuality that is not dominant, you cannot derive the benefits from these things. So even if you are a trans person in Malaysia, for example, I'm sure there are individuals in this room who think that it's extremely important for me to exercise this right, and because government is not providing, I must fight for my best. The harsh reality is this. It's unlikely you will get it, better you do it in secret, right? That's going to happen anyway. So, therefore, these things do not provide any value and we have the ability to trade it off. The conclusion is this. Even if governments take away these rights, I think it is more likely that you can derive direct benefits if policies are homogeneous and if people have the ability to follow through with what the government wants and reach that conclusion. I think that is where we get the most amount of benefit. Finally, on this idea that state will have manipulative control over individuals and decide for them what is the best, I think that is fair, because the privy of information that state has over everyone's data and what everyone needs to do in order to achieve economic goals and socio-political goals is best carried out by the government. And because of the frame we told you why it's less likely that governments will abuse these rights anyway, it's most likely that in the immediate harm of you, in the immediate benefit of you getting economic protection from all of these things when you sell these rights, equates to also long-term benefits where you realize there's no opportunity for dissent. Maybe you can feel sad that I can't be a pop star and I have to work as a government lackey in Putrajaya or something like that. But it doesn't matter, because at some point down the line, I would have never succeeded to become a pop star anyway. That's why it's more likely that if everyone benefits and more government gets money, it's more likely that everyone across the board will benefit, not only the rich. This is how you bridge inequality, not by telling the people in the minority that you have a chance, but by telling the minority individuals that you don't have a chance, but let me buy this chance away from you if you think it's so valuable. For those reasons, very proud to be on OG.
All right. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for that speech. To continue, Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
I'm presuming I'm the only woman in this finals. Quite an achievement in my book, personally. But I want to say, essentially what OJ is saying is, you're a woman, you're disenfranchised, cannot exercise your rights, might as well just sell it to the system that's fucking you over. I don't necessarily think that they have proven the link as to why making this decision, if it is true that these individuals are so desperate and these governments are so bad, why would these governments misuse these rights? But more importantly, where then do you pin the accountability once these rights are used to hurt other people? Because if the government is the one exercising your rights and those rights are no longer yours, if a person is hurt, who do they go to? I think this answer was unanswered coming up from their side of the house. A couple of responses. There are inherent problems with a couple of their premises. First thing teacher already pointed out, you cannot say that you have enough money to help incentivize people to sell their rights, but say we can be disincentivized from selling them because it hurts. Many of us work from 9 to 5. Are you going to stop working because you're tired? Probably not, because you recognize that there's a need for you to do these things. If it is true that individuals are desperate, I believe these individuals will not have the ability to make the most rational decision on your side of the house. No answer to this beyond a couple of jokes as responses. Secondly, no thank you. He then says policies can only be held if we take away your rights because you get to forego the disability. Okay, then look at all the progress that a lot of movements have already made within the status quo. Did that require us to sell our rights to the government? Probably not, right? Because I wouldn't be standing here and debating if I did. And more importantly, I think it's important to realize that the only way policies can be held and the only way governments can be held accountable to make initiatives to have these policies is to have enough critical mass on the ground, especially from these disempowered groups, in order to be able to push for the change against the rich people that your side of the house is willing to concede will exist regardless. So what change is going to exist? At best, you told me the harm exists on our side or on your side too, the benefits exist on our side too, but why is that benefit and harm exclusive to your side? No answer to that. Let's then look at what he then says. He says states have the right to interpret your rights. Completely mischaracterization or whatever TJ has told you, because what he has told you is governments have the ability to dispense and revoke your rights, but never to act on them. Realize from your info slide that Maya probably wrote, I'm not sure. But if it was true, based on the info slide, these governments can use these rights, right? That's why they can call you and tell you to donate your organs, kill yourself because they want your eyes. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I think this debate cannot happen unless your side of the house is willing to defend a state that acts on these rights in their benefits, because these governments have the ability to do so without you pinning them to any form of accountability, because you're literally walking up to the government, the person who's using the rights to fuck you over, and saying, don't fuck me over. What the hell, right? I don't necessarily think this is something that can happen on their eyesight. But the last thing that they said, if we cannot prove that there's a harm, then there's no case. So I'm going to prove to you why there's a harm, right? Let's look at my argument. As to tangible impacts and assessment of this policy, no, thank you, sit down, he made a kind of jokes. Oh, and it was really offensive for him to call TJ dumb. Firstly, What are additional problems with fundamental rights? 3 levels. Firstly, your fundamental rights are intertwined with each other. Realize your fundamental rights don't stand alone. Your right to life allows you to exercise your right to choice. Your right to choice allows you to exercise other rights that exist, like your freedom of movement, etc. So these fundamental rights do not stand alone. There's a reason why these rights are not just like, you have your right to sell your car and don't want it anymore. It is to sell everything. It is to make a choice to do anything, because all of these fundamental rights are fundamental to your existence, because every other ability for you to exercise these rights relies on you having some of these rights. But as an individual, you cannot make the rational calculus to decide to forego certain rights, because you cannot foresee what happens to your other rights, which is literally the only metric on their side of the house. Somehow or other, people can weigh out the responsibilities, but at the same time, they are desperate, at the same time, they need help. Don't understand this? No, thank you. Secondly, your fundamental rights are intertwined with other individuals' fundamental rights as well. Your right as a mother to exercise your choice affects your right of your child to live the best life that they can have. I think this needs to be recognized, because you making a decision for yourself also means you hurt other people in the process, because they're more often than not included in your decision-making calculus beyond the minimum of just thinking, am I going to mess up the people around me? But the last thing is, your fundamental rights are also a check and balance to the government that exists. So all these structures that exist within the status quo, like your democracy, like your law and justice system, all of these things, the deterrence, all of these punishments relies on an assessment of fundamental rights that you have the ability to exercise, but not the ability to sell off and mess other individuals over in the process. Second level to this argument, no thank you. Why are all these things then important? Firstly, the moment your government has access to your rights, the person in mind for the decision that they make as a government isn't you, it's the government, right? Because they are unable to see you as an individual who is valid in their decision-making calculus. Realize, if their characterization is true, that these minority groups are suffering and there's no other outcome mechanism, why would that same government use your rights to protect you and push for policies that actually help you? No link on their side of the house. So at the end of the day, you're just a puppet, because these governments aren't just taking over your rights and keeping them, they're going to use them, as stated in the info slide. The government is really, really bad. When you talk about decisions that they make, they are very unlikely to weigh out the benefits that it reaches to you, because you have sold that fundamental liberty to them, and they can do anything they want with this. But additionally, governments cannot be held to a pinpoint of accountability, because when you're talking about the status quo, the structures to hold individuals accountable is the government themselves. So a lot of the times, these individuals will be left hurt and shackled by the fact that this government is using this rights to discriminate against them, and it cannot hold anyone accountable. So at the end of the day, you directly hurt other individuals who never succumb to this hurt. Things like, for example, you as a mother selling off your rights and then ending up reducing the quality of life of your child in the process, because she or he can't express their own fundamental liberties because you sold yours. At the end of the day, you also cannot seek recourse, because there's no one to hold accountable to these actions. Sure.
I'm alive to find some form of purpose. If my fundamental rights does not cater to my ability to find that purpose, and I'm poor, why do you as the government are allowed to decide for this individual how they should live?
But that's not the comparative. It's not that this fundamental liberty cannot contribute to your purpose. It's as of now, the government has no incentive to create structures in order to mobilize that right for you to be able to access it. So what is that question? Maybe I'll answer it later. Lastly, your other structures that are harmful to society are also not likelier to be left standing, because there's not enough stronghold pressure enough to process and incentivize the government to be better, to start initiatives to improve your structural disparities, etc. Because realize, if an individual sells away their right to choice, which affects their right to vote, or just their vote in general, and you're a minority and they don't need to cater to you because they know that you can just sell your rights when you end up sinking over in the ocean, I don't necessarily see why on their side of the house governments have the incentive to be able to create these structures to help them, as opposed to having a cop-out policy like this, telling poor people, if you're suffering and you want to do something about it, might as well sell your rights to us and we can just use you however they want. Realize, the current structure within the status quo is using every one of us, but they're using the disempowered individuals the most. I don't understand why you want to continue to disempower them by literally forcing them to succumb into the hands of the individuals who have left them in those positions. Extremely proud proposal.
Thank you so much, DLO, for that speech. To continue, member of CAF. Here. Also, one more thing. Can the debaters not speak too near to the mic? Yeah, thank you.
Oh my God. Oh my ballsy.
Hello? Yeah. How do I turn this on? Press on button, say. Aduh.
Hello.
Serious speech, kids.
When my fundamental rights have never contributed to a warm meal, have never protected me when a policeman racially profiled me and put me in jail for no reason, have never helped me fix a system that is unfixable, I think at the very least you should get to choose whether or not you can sell something that has historically not helped you or your community elevate themselves from a system that is entrenched in discrimination and entrenched in stagnation. They should get to choose how they live their lives. And I'm going to prove to you why we do that best in closing government. 2 questions in terms of response. 1, opening opposition told you that currently there's progress that is being made by movements in status quo. Firstly, I want to disprove the convenience coming from opening opposition. If these movements work, if the government cared so much about helping these individuals, they wouldn't be so desperate that they would literally forego their fundamental rights to get more economic benefit. The system is so bad that we think it's fair, that it's a rational choice for me to help myself. And the only way I can help myself is to do this. The governments and social movements, I don't think don't have as big a role as they want you to believe. But then they said that enough critical mass can make social change. You have to prove to me why critical mass is achieved by having more fundamental rights. I don't think they do that because I don't think they care about poor people. Even if those poor people have rights, it's not whether or not poor people having rights helps them have more critical mass. It's whether or not people in power care about those poor people, and they don't, whether or not they had rights to begin with or not. The comparative here is we don't think poor people are actors of change. We don't think poor people need to go out there and fight in these movements themselves. Poor people have a direct incentive to help themselves, and it's the only thing they should prioritize, I think. Therefore, if this can help them help themselves, I think that we still win on that issue. But finally, they said that fundamental rights don't exist in isolation because of third-party harms. I think that's exactly why they're so willing to sell these rights. Because if you're a poor mother, you need money to send your children to school. If you're a poor mother, your children are asking you why we can't have 3 meals a day. How do you as a father or mother justify that to your child? The third party harms is so much more because these individuals feel even more guilty when they not having enough money is the reason why the third party gets harmed worse. In less extreme situations where they don't kill themselves to get the money, but they just can't post controversial Facebook statements, I think it's much better on our side. Because I'd rather not be able to have free speech if it means I get more money. But even in extreme situations, I still think it's having enough money to get your children out of the position that you're in is better for you as a whole. No, thank you. My extension. Why it is principally justified to make an irreversible decision. I think opening government came up here and said that poor people can choose because rights are an imposition of values. But we're going to prove to you that there was no option to choose anyways. And we think this is the most important thing in the debate. Because if we can prove that the rights were never going to help this individual, and these people therefore have a right to choose, I think we win the debate. Why do we give rights? We give rights to ensure fair governance by the state, to make sure that the state doesn't abuse me, that the state can't get away with abusing me. We give rights so that you can protect yourself. In instances when you're abused, instances when you're denied opportunities, you have legal recourse. We give rights so that you can find happiness. Therefore, if I can prove to you that currently you cannot achieve either of these 3 things, even though you have rights, I think I can prove why it's fine to sell them. I think it's fine that you have the right or you're able to make a proper choice to get rid of them. So why will you never access rights anyways as a minority? Ram came up here and gave a funny speech, but there was one true thing that he said. Rich people control society. How, Ram? Let me answer now. The state doesn't care anyways, and they make life worse. 3 reasons. 1, redlining. Redlining is literally the process where banks and financial institutions can carve out a neighborhood or a piece of land and say, we are not going to give people in that area loans. We're not going to give people in those areas equal economic incentives because you have discriminated and chosen to say that those areas are not as profitable or not as good. Why? Quick answer, racism. Wrong answer, government just doesn't care. And you know why they don't care? They didn't fix it. Redlining still happens in America to this day. No, thank you. Sit down. So already, fundamental rights, you still don't get money because banks don't care. Second, gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is literally when governments or politicians can carve up certain areas and say that they have less political representation because their votes count less. This means even if you're a poor person and you want to fight for change, you literally can't because or your gerrymandered state, you aren't able to make as big as a political contribution because your vote in that district isn't as important as the vote in a white district where there's more political capital and where it isn't gerrymandered. But three, we think over-policing. If you go to a jail in America, it looks like a slave house because it is filled with black people. It is filled with minorities because more often than not, these are the very people that didn't get any legal protection when they were unfairly arrested and they were unfairly pulled over. Over-policing is made worse by the fact that neighborhoods where poor people live in are likely to have 10 more police officers than they would in a white neighborhood who are more likely to pull you over for even stupider offenses. And historically, they haven't been able to defend themselves in court, so I don't see why rights equals that. No, thank you. So I think it's important here to show that because of these systems, you're locked out of your rights anyways. Redlining means you aren't as rich and so you can't buy as many things. Gerrymandering means that your political contribution is less. And over-policing means you're literally living in a slave-like state when more and more of your people go to jail. No, thank you. For example, more poor people join the army already because they are desperate anyways. Why should we then let these people determine what's more important to them? One, I think they've lived worst. Regardless of what you want to sell me in opposition, they've lived worse than being tools of the state. When you can't provide a proper dinner to your children, when you're already being jailed anyways for things you didn't do, I think you've lived worse and you had to go through even worse outcomes. So it's probably fair for me to say that you don't mind or you can rationally see which harm outweighs the other. But two, I think they suffer directly from the consequences. Rights don't bring them food, but more money does. Rights don't ensure their children education, but more money does. And therefore, the consequences directly affect them. They should have the most amount of ownership over the rights, not a state that, keep in mind, has not even used them properly to protect them anyways. Here's the comparative. Maybe they might regret this in the future, but I don't think a proper or good living future exists anyways in status quo. If I'm being robbed out of economic opportunities or political opportunities because of my skin color, because of my socio-economic position, it's not a good future anyways. But two, I think it's fair for them to value immediate problems. Eric Gardner had fundamental rights. Trayvon Martin had fundamental rights. But when he was gunned down by the police, I don't think he cared so much that he did because it didn't matter.
All right. Thank you, member of government, for that speech. To continue, member of here.
Let's go, Azim!
The guy in the batik is going against batik, you know. Am I going to go? In the 1950s, people didn't think that black civil rights was possible. In the 1980s, people didn't think that gay marriage in the United States was possible. In early 2018, we did not think that in Malaysia change was possible. We thought that we would live under Barisan Nasional till kingdom come. Bosio is wrong. The global poor do not live in a world of no alternatives. Alternatives do exist. And we think that the problem on side government is that the existence of this policy itself overshadows the ability for you to see the alternatives, overshadows the ability for you to understand that change is possible. But can we have that change? That's what I will prove to you within this debate. CEO's case will be simple. We'll explain to you, and I'll put it in simple. If we can prove that we are able to gain some form of change, and change is on a scale more preferable than the harm that they create, then we win this debate. Before we go to my extension, I'll clarify a few things and point us out and compare us to different teams. First, because we think that only opposition is wrong at the point where they still rely on the states as the arbiter of rights. We think that rights belong to you as an individual, regardless of who you are. Secondly, we think the problem with the case is that they themselves, all their argumentation is ethereal and ungrounded. This means they don't prove their impact. They only assert them of itself and will prove to you why it's better. Second, also prove to you how it can get status quo to be better and yield the entirety of opening government's case. Before that, sure.
Would you allow a woman in a community that doesn't respect women to be a prostitute?
That's her right, so she can do that, but she can also retract that right. You would also have to allow a person who your mother was to protect their child to also abort their child because the government doesn't want them to, because the government thinks that child could be a burden. On your world is a world where you allow eugenics to happen because you will create the idea that certain people are unwanted. On your world is a world where you can create a world where the rich can decide what they want no matter what. Yes, the rich controls the government, but that still means we are able to fight against them. If what they say is true, then we have no regime changes at all. Then we have no elections at all. We have disabilities on our side of the house. No, I'll respond to the entire Gulf case first. Second, we think that on-side government, they argue and assume that things will be worse. But we think that's not. The ability for us to have grassroots movements, to have the ability for us to have elections and have people who focus on the poor means that it's better. So yes, we can see that it is hard. But on the scale of probabilities, it is more likely that in your world where things are much likely going to be worse. Second, and this deals with the case coming from CG, we say that we do need these fundamental rights. We need them to equalize the harms of society and the birth lottery, because it means that because different people have different opportunities, and this means they have a fundamental right to allow people to live a good life after their protection, or because people can get the protection that they want, and now they can choose to prioritize what life they want, and to be able to have what wealth and what happiness that they can get. Secondly, we think that the harm that they wanted to argue is worse off because you are not living in the worst possible state.
On that point,
the life in America is the best it has ever been. There are no lynchings in the US. There are no slavery in the US. Things have moved to progress, and it's problematic if you say that things will never get worse, never get better, because it has. We think our government is a world where it's denying history and ignorant of history, and we reject that world altogether. We go to my argumentation. Why exactly the government creates a chain of oppression that makes progress impossible? Before that, does anyone have a timer? Because I totally forgot mine. So moving on to my argumentation. Why exactly it creates a chain of oppression that makes progress impossible? So firstly, I think we need to explain this, because OG makes it clear, this is a contract. Look, I can choose to leave a contract. I have the ability for me to decide when my boss tells me to come in at 10 p.m. I can say, hey, no, sorry. But it's also the ability for me to say that I can just quit any contracts that I want to enter. Secondly, I do have the ability for me to have alternatives on the contract. If I'm taking a bank loan, I can go to 5 different banks, and I have the ability for me to decide what negotiations better for me. I do not have that power on government, because the government is the one who's the only arbiter of these decisions. Second, we think that the biggest problem here is the way you are able to gain redress and gain better negotiations is impossible, because the ones who deal with that redress is the government itself. You can't complain against the government and still want to stop the government. This means it's a world where you are unable to gain any voice of dissent, any voice of rejection, because it is a strongest conflict of interest possible. You literally can never dissent on their world, because it's have nobody for you to say that. And worse off is you gain things like bias remorse, because you regret the actions that you take. You regret the abilities that you want to have. Yes, sure. In their best case, I was poor once and now I'm middle class. But hey, guess what? I want to send my kids and make them study engineering. No, I can't. The government says no. So in that moment, we think that on their world is the world where you reject and restrict my rights in the future because of my harms right now. I think those things are so much worse. No. Second, we think that On their world, governments can make multiple policies to force people to opt into these things. Because on their world, they can make more people buy into it. That's a great benefit to the government. Even OG agrees this to be true. But firstly, just make it clear, like, if I'm giving up my rights, that means I'm also giving up my rights to change the government. That means that on their world, it's the same government, the same regime ad infinitum. They can remove my right to vote. They can remove my right to make decisions and whatever I want to have. Why is this important? Because it means that governments has all the incentives to stay in power and all this to make sure and keep people as desperate as possible. They have the incentive to make sure that they don't do welfare because the poor will suffer, and as they suffer more people will opt in. And guess what? As you said, the rich don't care because the rich benefits from all of these things. And it's worse because the rich have the incentive to educate these people in a world where the people can't fight back. They don't understand these things in the first place because they benefit from cheap labor. They benefit from easy money. They benefit from easy things, from easy organs, for example. So moving on to the second part of argumentation. While structures in status quo to remedy poverty and income equality still exist, we think there's already an increase in awareness of income inequality. We have companies like Amazon giving into $15 minimum wages. We have tuition-free colleges and Medicare for all. We have things like increased welfare and the ability for you to discuss everything you want. We have the way for people to move beyond redlining to vote in a black president from the US. We have the ability for people to understand that over-policing is a problem. That's why Andrew Yang and Bernie Sanders is pushing policies to deal with those things in the first place. Second, we know that the poor can create a large voter bloc, and this means you are able to break the media homogeny that's used to showcase the gap of the poor. This is the age of the internet and globalization. They're not that dumb. They realize things are bad. They can collectivize. Finally, yes, we do concede that life is hard. We do conceive that on our side, progress will be slow and it will be hard. But we think that if you create a world where progress is impossible, then progress will truly be impossible. Proud to oppose.
All right. Okay, thank you, Member Hawk. If you guys would like to use the toilet, please do it now.
Your mother's right will directly affect your children. But then they didn't really be honest. Fundamental
clear definition yang paling biasa Google lah. Definition between it's a term that the other form of fundamental rights. That's why but to opening of
the live stream is still on.
How would you address
All right, everyone, please clip it down. We're gonna continue. All right, thank you, member of all for that speech. To continue, Gafwit. Yeah.
Test. It's times like this when I wish I was in the audience, where I can laugh at Ram's speech instead of thinking, shit, do I have an extension anymore? But I realize I do. The reason why I think I do is because we need to analyze why we have fundamental rights in the first place. Why are there individuals in our society that are willing to take up the Batik program and trade off those rights? And I think the answer to these questions is that our fundamental rights is there to cater and facilitate to our need as human beings to find a purpose in our life. But if those fundamental rights can't have you the ability to find your purpose based on the structural reasons that we heard from Sid's extension, then what is the point anymore? If Eric Garner and Trayvon Martin can never find any happiness, if they said they're supposed to be protected but they're dead instead, what is the point? In their world, they say we want to fight for social change. But instead of a lynching, what you have now is people using guns. It is still the same problem. People are still suffering. Fundamental rights are every single day actively being stripped away in different ways or different names. It doesn't mean they exist, and I don't know why you are the arbiter to decide for these individuals if those rights exist. I think because these questions went unanswered by the side of opposition, they have no position to be against. But I'll just take out Azim's speech really quick because it sounds very, very altruistic. I heard his argument so many times in high school debates. Like, bro, life sucks, make it better. But if life sucks, just don't live that life anymore. So there are multiple different versions of life. I can find purpose in life by using rights to find purpose. But if I can't find that purpose anymore, screw it, right? Just do whatever I want. If whatever I want means getting money, if that whatever I want means is finding purpose from the government getting benefit from my existence, then what's so bad about that? If individuals can be happy in that world, instead of a false narrative where later in the future they can be happy, what's the point? Why do you decide in the facade of a vacuum that these individuals are the best arbiter compared to individuals themselves? Sid told you the standard to this choice is not just consent. They said, no, you are coerced by your factors. Yeah, you make choices based on the factors you are coerced upon. Who are you to decide those factors are wrong? You as an individual should decide for yourself. Then they say it's about irreversibility. Bro, I went for worse. I wasted 7 months of my life. It's irreversible. I can choose to regret the decision. I can choose to be happy about it. But it doesn't make the choice a bad choice. So I don't think it's enough for you to say that because the metric's irreversibility, you can't make the choice anymore. Then also you like regret vasectomy or something. I don't know, bro. It doesn't make sense. All right. The next thing they said is that, okay, so maybe it's true that if I stay in this world where I have my fundamental rights, I can eventually make that world a better place. But those individuals that believe these things can still exist in the world of government. They can still fight for better rights. They can still pander to individuals and they can do it better. The reason why they can do it better is because your governments have more assets and resources to cater to multiple different individuals with multiple different needs. The reason of how you get these assets are those individuals who are opted into the Batik program. Those individuals can help you cater to individuals' needs. The reason why governments can't do this is because there's a finite resource when it comes to prioritizing individuals. Yes, governments balance those things, but you have a higher capacity to balance it based on the assets of individuals that do not believe in the government anymore. You can help those individuals that you wanted to help. Audrey, the more women that can come up and hear and speak, if we give more opportunities to do so, we can give them more opportunities and more resources to cater to those opportunities. That's how we bring the comparative coming from closing government. I'll take one later. All right, let's talk about the purpose of life. So the first thing I'll say to this is that the reason why we have rights, besides the whole World War II convention, pain, we need rights, protection, is that these rights are there to facilitate your choices. But if I can't make those choices, why do these rights exist? Also very convenient. If you're poor, why does the right to property matter?
Like TJ, maybe pick a better right. Like if you're poor, you can't get a car. But the point here is, if I'm poor or if I'm discriminated, I can't make any choice anyway. I can't choose the job I want. I can't be a pop star like what Ram says. So there's no point of these rights. And if I, as an individual, decide that there's no value to these rights, instead I can use it economically, then what's the harm anymore? They say that devalues other people, but it doesn't. The reason why it doesn't is because now you actively know there are some individuals that will prioritize their rights over economic gain, some individuals won't. So the individuals that choose not to trade off their right for economic gain are individuals that will actively protect their rights in the future. I will posit to you that instances like in China that are completely abhorrent like what they do to Uyghurs are less likely to occur. The reason why this is true is because governments do this all the time. Governments always trade off your fundamental rights and they get away with it. But at least in our world, there is a cost attached to doing these kinds of things. And governments cannot need to hide when they're doing it because they actually can if they just pay these people off. So in this regard, I think there's more transparency, there's more accountability. Individuals can make better choices. So what is the harm from opposition? I don't know, bro. Fred, do something. Opening. Okay, your argument is simply to say that because individuals cannot access certain rights right now, these rights have no value towards them. But this doesn't respond to the harm that at the point where one individual can sell their right, it devalues this right, which means that this right has less value and less value for the state to protect it for individuals that choose not to sell it. No, if anything, I think the rights have more value. So if lesser people have these rights, that makes it like it's unique lah. So some people want it, some people don't. The people that want it will prioritize it more. So if individuals as actors decide that these rights are more important, they'll constantly keep your governments in check, and that's what we argue. They say you can vote these governments out, so that means you can protect those rights. The thing is, right, if poverty is something that's seen as a social illness, if people build walls, if people don't let you go out to vote, if certain areas are seen as areas that you cannot enter, if prisons are just horrible where your traumatic experiences are day by day, why do those fundamental rights protect you? Why do those fundamental rights help you? How do you create any check and balance? How do you have accountability? In that world, I don't think you get much change, and all the reasons that Sid told you just now are reasons as to why that change cannot occur. So when he told you that like the things like redlining, gerrymandering, over-policing, in addition to this is the fact that there are powerful structures in play that just cannot change. Individuals that benefit from the structures will not change in your world either. Your poor individuals will still be hidden. Individuals in Rio will still have walls around their highways, so individuals don't need to see the slums they live in. For those individuals, at least they have money now. At least they can access some form of social mobility. At least they can get food, bro. They can eat. They can, like why not? They can't get happiness from rights. At least let them get happiness from some materialistic wealth or just some money in general. Based on everything Sid told you, that things will just not change. They cannot argue an altruistic world because those things are just far in between and unlikely to materialize. If these things are true, then I think it's better that individuals make the choice for themselves.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Gafik, for that speech. To conclude Malaysian Nationals 2019, I'd like to invite the last speaker of the House up with here.
I really understand the tone that came from the Gulf team because in actuality, they have to defend totalitarianism, whereby fundamental rights are stripped away. But to answer the question posited by closing government, here's how fundamental rights help the African Americans you talked about. So, an example, and the easiest example would be if you're racially profiled by a police officer, for example, you have the right of habeas corpus, whereby you cannot be detained without trial. Police officers have to show probable cause. Police officers have to provide evidence. Those things benefit minorities in multiple different ways, whether or not they know about it. So from closing opposition, we just had a simple burden that we placed on ourselves in this debate. We're going to demonstrate why democracy is better than totalitarianism, dealing with opening government. And I'm going to explain why we think that fundamental rights are essential for these people to be able to uplift themselves from the lives that they live. No. I'll take you later because you already argued totalitarianism. So let's just deal with opening government first. They say that in status quo, democracies are bad because you have to resolve competing interests in democracies and therefore there's a propensity for conflict. You know, fundamental rights, firstly, would likely prevent those conflicts to happen to begin with. That's just the short term. But secondly, we think that the comparison is better because at least that in democracies, minorities are more likely going to be able to horse trade for policies. Because one, they have the right to vote and exercise political power and empower themselves through politicians that represent them. In your world, if your context is that it's already bad for the poor, the rich who will not be selling their rights because they're already rich are likely going to be entrenching political power insofar as they're likely going to divert state funds to benefit themselves. And even if the poor is going to be rich in their world, they will be a different category altogether. I'll just call them rich without rights. So these are rich people who cannot vote. These are rich people who cannot get any ability to hold governments to account. I think the comparison is still worse. But the second thing they say, it's fine that you leave it up to the government to decide what's best for the state because they have data. One, that's assertive, right? There was no analysis to explain why governments are more likely going to use data in a good way because, you know, they are a totalitarian state that wants to take fundamental rights from you. But secondly, we think that the comparison already exists in status quo. If your problem is that governments do not use data, we are perfectly happy to defend technocrats being able to include data in policy making. We'll be happy to have think tanks and researchers for politicians and debate those things in parliament. I'm unclear as to why your solution of totalitarianism is likely going to solve that small concern of yours. I think the comparison of democracies are still preferable there. But the last thing they say, and this is the principal justification from opening government, is that rights can be a commodity because of the similarities to other rights we give away. You know the difference between that right to work and selling your fundamental rights? There's legal recourse because you're able to argue and negotiate for those rights later in comparison to your work, whereby, you know, if you have bias remorse, you can't go back to the government and say, I want my freedom of speech back because I'm now rich and I value my freedom of speech to be able to hold you to account because I'm in a rich minority. I think that bias remorse is significantly important in debate because it directly deals with the principle of how it can be a commodity. But here's where the CG and the OG pinch their case on. They say that people can be rational. Look, this is a policy debate. They didn't prove a policy as to how they are likely going to disseminate information well, so they fail on their burden there. But even if we were to take them at their best, the best case scenario is that there will still be coercive factors in status quo that will likely prevent you from making the best decisions for yourselves, i.e. poverty, because you are mentally stressed to a point whereby you're less likely going to digest information well, and therefore when the state tells you that the opt-out notion is to sell your rights, you're inclined because you have a tunnel vision as to how the ways you want to escape poverty. Or the worst case scenario is that governments are just more likely going to cut welfare spending because they can just coerce poor people into accepting the comparative, which is to sell fundamental rights. Because like the assumption from CG and OG is that governments are benevolent enough to be able to negotiate for rights, which is like not true in status quo because governments have different political interests catering to the rich and the majority and across religious and political lines, but also the poor, as you say, have less political power to be able to influence policy making well. So I'm unclear as to how these people are not likely going to be forced into making the worst decisions for themselves, i.e. selling them rights. Yes, opening. Come on. Totalitarianism.
Why must I preserve my rights now for hope of changing others when I'm dead?
Because you're dead and therefore it doesn't apply to you anymore. That's the answer lah. Yo, what is this? The extension. I think the extension is significantly important because I think that closing opposition was the only team to contest the bleak world of the Gov bench in regards to why we think that we're able to make policy making better for the poor. Firstly, we think that we need to argue the comparison that exists in status quo. Like, change is hard, but I think that one, we already argued to you in closing opposition and not the assertion that came from opening opposition in regards to why exactly the poor can fight for better rights for themselves. Because A, the fact that the poor holds a huge political power in many states because they form the largest voting bloc because, there's just more of them in comparison to the rich. We get that they are able to break the media hegemony that allows them to be able to be oppressed with the age of the internet and globalization because they're able to access information easily. And they have enough money to be able to overwhelm corporate lobbying that politicians depend on in order for them to be able to get elected. We think that the poor has substantial power. But the second thing that is unique is also about explaining the increase of awareness when it comes to the problems of income inequality. Because the CG's problem here is that, okay, they want us to defend oppressive states. But if your problem is oppressive states, how is selling fundamental rights is going to make things better for these people? The state is more likely going to be able to exercise their asymmetry of power to be able to oppress them even more. So I think that the comparative is still worse. Lastly, the argument about the chain of oppression is that you are less likely going to be able to hold them to account. And also, you are less likely going to be able to ensure a better life. Because, yes, status quo is terrible, but it can be improved and it doesn't require you to sell fundamental rights. And CEO was the only thing that delineated that and actually explained to you how it works. Horse trading can work. Please believe in it. Believe in democracy.
All right. Thank you so much for that speech, Opposition Whip. Let's give them a round of applause for that amazing debate. All right, teams, please cross the floor. Yep, shake hands if you guys are comfortable. Yeah, so we will leave the room. Thanks.